over the fantasy football season. And here's a few kickers I would start this week. The first guy, Greg Zeroline of the Dallas Cowboys. So Zeroline here, he missed Ben's ball game with the protocols, but he came back in week 11 and had a good fantasy day, 10 fantasy points. So he looked 100%. His kicks looked accurate, and he looked like he could kick them from long range. So right here on Thanksgiving Day, a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders that give up the fifth most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So right here, I think Greg the Leg in Dallas, they're going to fall short a few times in the red zone area like they did last week. And they're without two top weapons. And Reno's out, and Lamb most likely is going to be out, in my opinion. And even if he plays, he's not going to be 100%. So right here, I think Zeroline in this one could score anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points. And he's on a top offense still in this league, even though last week they only scored 9 points. He's going to have tons of opportunities and another good game. The next kick is Brandon McManus of the Denver Broncos. So Brandon McManus, coming off a bye week, has a good matchup versus the Chargers. I give up the second most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So McManus, it's been an up and down season for him, no doubt about it. But right here in week 12, I think he has a decent ball game versus the Chargers. And he kicks better at home as well. So the last few games here for McManus: week 8 versus Washington 6, week 9 at Dallas 10, week 10 versus Philly 5, and now here week 12, I think anywhere from 6 to 10 fantasy points is decent for him. And he's available right now in 85% of fantasy leagues. The next kick is Daniel Carlson of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Carlson, he's getting things going over the last few weeks here, being more accurate and getting more opportunities here for fantasy owners and the Raiders. So week 9 at the Giants, 8 fantasy points. Week 10 versus the Chiefs 2. And week 11 versus Cincinnati 7. So right here in week 12, he's got a decent matchup at the Cowboys that give up the 14th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And right here, Dallas, they're a bend but don't break type of defense. We saw him versus a tough Chief offense hold them down only to 1 touchdown in that ball game. So in this one, I think Carlson has a decent game. I think he'll get a few opportunities, and he's been a pretty accurate kicker this season. So right here, he's a kicker I would start this week. The next kicker is Robbie Gould of the San Francisco 49ers. So ever since he returned off the injured reserve list, in week 9, he's had a good game versus Arizona, 4 fantasy points. Week 10 versus the Rams 9, and week 11 at Jacksonville 13. And this week here, another great matchup here for Robbie Gould versus the Minnesota Vikings that give up the 3rd most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So right here, the Vikings, we know they've been in a lot of shootouts this season, and we know opposing kickers have had good games versus them this year. So this week here, I think Robbie Gould once again could easily get 8 to 10 fantasy points. And this Niner offense, they've been working well. They've been spreading the ball out, getting Ayuk and Samuel having good games. And I think Gould in this one will have a few good opportunities and have a good fantasy day as a kicker to start this week. And the 5th and final kicker I would start Young Hoku of the Atlanta Falcons. So Young Hoku, we know he's got one of the best legs in all pro football. But the problem with him this season is he's on a roster and a team that just don't score the football much or get him many opportunities. So the last few weeks here for Koo, week 9 in New Orleans 8, week 10 at Dallas 3, and last week versus New England, no fantasy points in that game. But right here, week 12 at Jacksonville, I think the Falcons can move the football down the field a little in this one, at least get in field goal range for Koo. And they do give up the 8th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So right here, I think Koo in this one has a good ball game, and it wouldn't surprise me if he somehow even reaches double digits as well. But I'm going to say at least 6 fantasy points or 7. So that's a few kickers I would start here in week 12 of the fantasy football season.